Hi everybody, it's Rhiannon from the Epsom Bakehouse, and I wanted to talk to you today about avoiding doing this one thing that will help prevent you turning out bread that resemble bricks. And it's a really simple thing, and it's something that I talk to people about in classes all the time. I see people doing it all the time, and people are always a bit surprised when I say, try not doing that and let's see how your bread turns out. So I've got a bit of bread dough here, if you can see. And yeah, when you're kneading it, it can be really sticky. So it can get on your hands. And I always say in classes, embrace the stickiness. It's making great dough. But I see people as they begin to knead their dough together and it's sticky and it's wet and it's perhaps not a sensation they're quite used to when it's all stuck to their hands. Here's what they grab. They go for the flour and they're desperate to start sprinkling it everywhere. And they want to have it all over their dough and their hands, and they just really want to flour as much as possible onto the surface and knead their dough until it stops being sticky. And my tip today is, if you can avoid doing that, because it is something, as I say, I see people doing all the time in classes, and I kind of know why they might want to sprinkle the flour. For a start, they see people all the time sprinkling in videos. They might be sprinkling flour. It looks really cool if you can fling a bit of flour down while you're baking and while you're baking your bread and kneading your dough. But try to avoid doing that. And the other reason I realised that people might want to sprinkle flour everywhere is that a lot of recipe books say knead on a lightly floured surface. I bet if you go and find a recipe now, whether it's in a book that you've got, or whether it's in a recipe online, or just one that you've been passed down, people will always suggest it's a bit sticky, why not knead on a floured surface? Well, my tip today is, if you can avoid doing that one thing, flouring the surface before you knead your bread dough, you will avoid perhaps turning out a little brick. Why would I suggest doing that? Well, first of all, you don't know what that person is kneading. If you see someone kneading a bread dough, they might be using a bit of additional flour because it is really wet and sticky, and it's the only way to control that bread dough. Your flour is like a sponge, and as soon as you add in that water, it is soaking up that water like a sponge, and that makes great bread dough. You want your bread dough to be as moist and wet as possible and still maintain its shape, because that is going to make great bread. So when you start flinging flour everywhere, all you're doing, it's like adding in extra sponges to your dough. Suddenly the water is being sucked up left, right and centre, and your dough is getting drier and drier, and that's not great because, first of all, if you think about how you're going to finish off making that dough, you're going to leave it to rise, and it might dry out a tiny bit, although you'll cover it to prevent that. But then also you're just going to shape it and pop it in a super hot oven where it's just going to dry out even more. So the less moisture there is in there at the start, the drier and drier your bread gets as it goes through the process to go from dough to bread. So if you start off with quite dry dough because you flung loads of flour in at the start, all you're going to do is end up with an even drier brick at the end of the baking process. So my tip today, we're just talking about it, is avoiding flouring your surface when you're kneading the dough. Please stop doing that. I know that it's really tempting when your dough is really sticky and stuck to your hands like this, but I always say embrace the stickiness because it means you're making great bread dough. So what can you do instead of flinging flour everywhere if you're really not enjoying the stickiness? Put down a tiny bit of olive oil, that will help, or make your hands a little bit wet because that will stop you sticking to the dough. So even if you've just got the remainders of the jug of water, just a tiny bit of wetness on your hands and it will stop you sticking so much to the dough. So it makes it much easier. And actually all you'll do there is add a bit more moisture into your dough. That as you're kneading, you're waiting for the dough, the flour in the dough to absorb the water. So if you continue to knead, I promise you, if you embrace that stickiness at the start, it will become smoother and more easy to knead because the stickiness will reduce as the flour absorbs all the water. The other solution that you can have, of course, is to use one of these, a bread scraper, and you probably just see me through the course of this video using it to scrape the dough off the surface. Try not to get your fingers too involved in this kneading process. Use a scraper. You could even just do a neat stretch and fold kneading if it's really sticky. If you've been watching, thank you ever so much. It'd be great to know if you've got any other bread making questions in the comments. I'm really excited to be launching my first online bread making course, which will be launching soon, and it will be full of tips like this, how to bake great bread at home. So it will be aimed at people who are learning to bake bread or want to sharpen up their skills. I'll pop a link in the comments, but if you would like to know more, you can certainly join the wait list, and I'll be getting more information out to people very soon. So otherwise, I hope that's been helpful, and I look forward to chatting with more bread making with you soon. But I'll say bye for now and happy baking.